Lila Howard howled in anguish as electricity surged through her body, the reptilian Arcturian known as Ilara standing over her restrained form with a cold smirk. Such a pathetic little creature, he thought, as he pressed the shock rod into her ribs again, savoring her screams. She would tell him the location of the human's hidden base, or she would suffer for hours until her heart finally gave out. "I'll ask you one more time, girl. Where is the human stronghold?" Ilara growled, his forked tongue flicking out to taste her fear-scented sweat. "Trust me, this is just the beginning. I can draw your agony out for days if need be." Lila gritted her teeth, her eyes blazing with defiance despite the pain racking her body. She knew the importance of the secret base, the last refuge of humanity in a war-torn galaxy. She would never betray her people, even in the face of this monster's torture. But Ilara had no idea of the true depths of his miscalculation, for this girl was the daughter of the infamous Craig Howard, the man who had single-handedly broken the Arcturian siege of Mars. He was a one-man army, a super soldier beyond anything the aliens had ever faced. And now, as Lila's tormented cries echoed through the halls of Ilara's stronghold, her father was coming for her with all the righteous fury of a god of war. As Craig Howard's stealth ship slipped through the Arcturian planetary defenses, he checked his arsenal one last time. Plasma grenades, an ionic pulse rifle, and his trusty monofilament blade honed to an atom's width. These invaders had made the mistake of spilling his family's blood. And in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. The human super-soldier was on the warpath, and he would not stop until he had painted the stars red with Arcturian gore. The confrontation between the legendary Craig Howard and the sadistic warlord Ilara was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance. Craig Howard's stealth ship docked silently onto Ilara's fortress, the advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to the Arcturian scanners. Craig emerged from the airlock, his dark, form-fitting stealth suit blending seamlessly with the shadows of the alien stronghold. His mind raced with thoughts of his daughter, her agonized screams still echoing in his ears from the distress signal he had intercepted. Those reptilian bastards would pay for every drop of her blood they spilled. Craig moved through the twisting corridors with feline grace, his footsteps making no sound on the cold metal floor. Suddenly, a group of Arcturian guards rounded the corner, their plasma rifles at the ready. Craig reacted with blinding speed, launching himself at the guards in a flurry of strikes and kicks. His monofilament blade flashed in the dim light, slicing through armor and flesh with equal ease. The guards fell one by one, their dying gurgles echoing off the walls. In the midst of the chaos, Craig spotted a computer terminal and seized his chance. He pulled a neural interface device from his belt and jammed it into the terminal's port. His mind merged with the Arcturian system, data streaming across his vision in a cascade of alien glyphs. There, in the heart of the fortress, he found what he was looking for. Lila's location, a high-security interrogation chamber deep in the bowels of the stronghold. Craig planted explosive charges as he raced through the corridors, his rage mounting with every step. He would bring this whole fucking place down on their scaly heads. As he neared the interrogation chamber, a hulking figure stepped out from the shadows to block his path. It was Kazurak, Ilara's personal enforcer. The Arcturian's eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, his massive form rippling with muscle beneath his black armor. Craig didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his fists flying in a blizzard of blows. Kazurak met him head-on, his own strength and speed a match for the humans. They traded body blows that would have shattered concrete, their armor cracking under the onslaught. Blood flew as they ripped into each other, neither giving an inch. Craig felt ribs crack under Kazurak's punishing strikes, but he pushed through the pain, his focus absolute. He feinted left, then struck like a cobra, his hand darting out to grip Kazurak's throat. The Arcturian's eyes bulged as Craig lifted him off his feet. With a roar of fury, Craig slammed Kazurak down, his head cracking against the metal floor. The enforcer went limp, his neck snapped like a twig. Craig staggered to his feet, his body battered but his resolve unbreakable. Lila was close, he could feel it, and when he found her, Ilara would learn the true meaning of a father's wrath. The Arcturian warlord's reign of terror was about to come to a very painful end. Craig blasted the door to the interrogation chamber, his heart pounding in his chest. As the smoke cleared, he saw Ilara standing over Lila's prone form, a sadistic grin on his reptilian face. "Ah, the famous Craig Howard," Ilara hissed, his eyes glinting with malice. "I knew you'd come for your precious daughter." Craig's blood ran cold as he saw Lila's motionless body, fearing the worst, but then he noticed the slight rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but barely hanging on. Ilara, recovering from his initial surprise, activated a shimmering force field around himself and Lila, blocking Craig's path. "You fool," Ilara sneered. "Did you really think I wouldn't know who she was? The daughter of the great Craig Howard, the man who shattered our siege on Mars? I orchestrated this whole thing to lure you here." The Arcturian warlord then revealed a sleek exoskeleton encasing his body, its advanced technology humming with power. "And now, with this enhancement, I'm more than a match for you." Craig gritted his teeth, his rage boiling over. He launched himself at Ilara, their enhanced forms clashing in a flurry of blows. The force field crackled and sparked as they slammed each other into its unyielding surface. The interrogation chamber quickly became a war zone, with shattered equipment and debris flying in all directions. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as the two titans battled, neither giving an inch. But even as he fought, Craig's tactical mind raced. He noticed a glowing core at the center of Ilara's exoskeleton, its power source. With a daring lunge, Craig managed to land a devastating blow to the core, causing it to flicker and destabilize. Ilara's exoskeleton began to malfunction, its strength enhancement fading. The force field too collapsed, leaving Lila exposed. Seizing his chance, Craig rushed to his daughter's side, pulling an emergency nanite injector from his suit. He pressed it to Lila's neck, the advanced medical tech rushing to repair her injuries and stabilize her vital signs. Ilara, now vulnerable without his exoskeleton, staggered back. "This isn't over, Howard," he snarled, retreating into the depths of the fortress. "I will have my revenge on you and all of your pathetic species." Craig hardly heard the threat, his focus solely on Lila. He gathered her into his arms, cradling her close as he turned to make his escape. He knew reinforcements would be coming. They had to get out, and fast. As Craig raced through the fortress's corridors with Lila in his arms, the explosives he had planted earlier erupted in a cacophony of fire and shrapnel. The blasts tore through reinforced walls, sending debris flying in all directions. Alarms blared, and emergency lights flashed, bathing the halls in pulsing red. Arcturian soldiers swarmed from every direction, their plasma rifles spitting bolts of searing energy. Craig ducked and weaved, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to evade the deadly barrage. He returned fire with his own pulse rifle, each shot finding its mark with pinpoint precision. Lila stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. "Dad?" she croaked, her voice weak. "I'm here, baby," Craig said, his voice strained with exertion. "Just hold on, we're getting out of here." He rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of Arcturian elites, their armor gleaming in the flickering light. Craig didn't hesitate. He charged forward, a plasma grenade already primed in his hand. The grenade detonated in the midst of the squad, the blast wave slamming them against the walls like rag dolls. Craig leapt through the flames, his boots pounding against the metal floor. Ilara's voice suddenly boomed over the fortress's intercom, his tone laced with fury. "Initiate the self-destruct sequence. I want this human filth burned from the face of the universe." A robotic voice began to count down. "Self-destruct in T-5 minutes. Craig's heart raced. They were running out of time. He had to get Lila to the stealth ship before the whole place went up in flames. They burst into the hangar bay, the vast space filled with Arcturian fighters and dropships, and there, standing before the stealth ship, was a sight that made Craig's blood run cold. It was a massive Arcturian mech, its armored hull bristling with weapons, and in the cockpit, visible through the translucent canopy, was Ilara himself, his eyes burning with malevolent glee. "Did you think you could escape me, Howard?" Ilara's voice boomed from the mech's external speakers. "I will crush you like the insect you are." The mech's arm cannons swiveled to aim at Craig, their barrels glowing with building energy. Craig barely had time to dive behind a stack of supply crates before the cannons fired, the blasts vaporizing the spot where he had just been standing. Craig set Lila down gently behind the crates, his mind racing. He had to take out that mech, but his pulse rifle would barely scratch its armor. He needed something with more punch. His eyes fell on a rack of Arcturian heavy weapons nearby. Among them was a shoulder-mounted plasma launcher, its barrel glowing with barely contained power. Craig sprinted for the rack, zigzagging to avoid the mech's withering fire. He snatched the launcher and spun, bringing it to bear on the mech's cockpit. The launcher kicked like a mule as it fired, the plasma bolt streaking across the hangar bay and slamming into the mech's canopy. The transparent material cracked and splintered, but held. Ilara laughed, the sound distorted by the mech's speakers. "Is that the best you can do, human?" Craig gritted his teeth and fired again and again. The canopy began to crumble under the onslaught, pieces of it falling away to reveal Ilara's snarling face. The mech staggered forward, its damaged leg servos whining in protest. It raised its arms, the cannons glowing brighter than ever. Craig braced himself, knowing he couldn't evade the blast this time. But just as the cannons were about to fire, a barrage of pulse rifle shots struck the mech from the side. Its armored hull buckled and sparked, the shots finding weaknesses in its joints. Craig turned to see Lila kneeling behind the crates, his pulse rifle clutched in her hands. She was battered and bloodied, but her eyes blazed with the same fire as her father's. Together, father and daughter poured fire into the mech, tearing it apart piece by piece. Ilara's screams of rage turned to shrieks of pain as the mech's systems overloaded and exploded. The robotic countdown continued. Self-destruct in T-1 minute. Craig ran to Lila, scooping her up and sprinting for the stealth ship. They leaped through the open hatch, Craig's hands flying over the controls as he initiated the emergency launch sequence. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting it off the hangar bay floor. Craig punched the throttle and the ship shot forward, narrowly avoiding the closing hangar bay doors. Behind them, the fortress erupted in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave buffeting the ship as it streaked away into the star-flecked void. As the stealth ship rocketed away from the exploding fortress, the shockwaves buffeted the hull, nearly knocking Craig off his feet. He gripped the control console, his knuckles white as he fought to keep the ship steady. In the co-pilot's seat, Lila groaned, her eyes fluttering open as she regained consciousness. "Dad?" she croaked, her voice raspy from screaming. "What happened?" Craig glanced over at her, relief flooding through him at the sight of her alive. "We made it out. Ilara's dead and his fortress is space dust." He reached for the medical kit, pulling out a nanite injector. He pressed it to Lila's neck, the advanced tech rushing to repair the damage from Ilara's torture. Lila sighed as the pain ebbed, her breathing evening out. Suddenly an alarm blared through the cockpit. Craig's eyes snapped to the sensor display, his heart sinking at what he saw. A massive fleet of Arcturian ships had just entered the system, their formation centered around a gargantuan dreadnought. "Shit," Craig hissed. "It's Emperor Zorkak, Ilara's father." Lila's eyes widened, fear and anger warring on her face. "He's come for revenge." As if on cue, Zorkak's image flared to life on the comm screen, his reptilian features twisted with rage. "Craig Howard!" he roared, his voice booming through the speakers. "You murdered my son! I will tear you apart with my bare claws!" Craig glared back at the screen, his jaw set. "Your son was a sadistic monster. He got what he deserved." Zorkak snarled, his eyes burning with hatred. "Destroy that ship! Let the void claim their corpses!" The Arcturian fleet surged forward, a swarm of fighters and frigates racing towards Craig's lone stealth ship. Pulse cannons and plasma torpedoes filled the void, a deadly web of energy that would shred the ship to pieces. But Craig was no ordinary pilot. He'd been flying since before Lila was born, his skills honed in countless battles. His hands flew over the controls, the ship responding like an extension of his will. They danced through the barrage, the ship's advanced shields absorbing what they couldn't evade. Craig wove between the massive Arcturian vessels, using their bulk against them. Fighters crashed into the sides of frigates, torpedoes meant for the humans instead, slamming into Arcturian shields. But even Craig's skills couldn't overcome the sheer numbers of the Arcturian fleet. A lucky shot grazed the stealth ship's port engine, alarms screaming as the damage reports flooded in. Smoke poured from ruptured conduits, the acrid scent filling the cockpit. Craig gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They couldn't keep this up. It was only a matter of time before the Arcturians overwhelmed them. He glanced at Lila, his heart wrenching at the thought of what he had to do. "Lila," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm going to program the ship to jump to the nearest human outpost. You'll be safe there." Lila's head snapped around, her eyes wide. "What about you?" Craig swallowed hard. "I'll take an escape pod, draw their fire, give you a chance to escape." "No," Lila cried, tears welling in her eyes. "I won't leave you." Craig reached out, gripping her hand tight. "You have to. The Resistance needs you. Earth needs you." His voice cracked. "I need you to live." Tears streamed down Lila's face, but she nodded, understanding shining through the grief. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything." With a final squeeze of her hand, Craig turned back to the controls. His fingers flew over the interface, programming the jump coordinates and transfer of control. The ship shuddered as another blast rocked the shields, warning lights flashing red. Craig hit the final command, then lunged from his seat. He pulled Lila into a fierce hug, pouring all his love into that final embrace. Then, before she could protest, he shoved her back into the seat and slapped the harness closed. "Craig!" Lila screamed as he sprinted from the cockpit, racing for the escape pods. He leapt into the nearest one, the hatch sealing with a hiss. Through the viewport, he saw the stealth ship's engines flare, the quantum field enveloping the hull. With a flash of light, the ship vanished, jumping to safety and carrying the most precious cargo in Craig's universe, his daughter. Craig's escape pod burst from the side of the stealth ship, drawing the attention of the Arcturian fleet. Pulse blasts hammered against the pod's meager shields, alarms shrieking as they failed. The pod jolted as a tractor beam locked on, dragging him towards the Emperor's dreadnought. Craig slumped back in the seat, exhaustion and grief washing over him. But beneath it all burned a cold, unyielding resolve. He would finish this, one way or another. The pod shuddered as it was pulled into the dreadnought's hangar bay, the hatch blasted open by Arcturian soldiers. They dragged Craig out, their claws digging into his flesh as they hauled him through the ship. They threw him to the deck before the Emperor's throne, a massive chamber of black metal and pulsing red light. Zorkak loomed over him, his eyes burning with malevolent glee. "Craig Howard," he hissed, savoring the name like a fine wine. "The great hero of humanity, brought low before me." Craig pushed himself to his knees, glaring up at the Emperor. "Your son deserved worse, and so do you." Zorkak's tail lashed, his claws flexing. "I will take great pleasure in peeling the flesh from your bones. Your screams will echo through this ship for cycles to come." But Craig wasn't listening. His hand had drifted to his chest, his fingers brushing against a small hidden bump beneath his skin. A subdermal implant, a final failsafe he'd hoped never to use. His eyes met Zorkak's, a grim smile spreading across his face. "I'll see you in hell." He pressed down hard, the implant clicking beneath his fingers. A high-pitched whine filled the air, building in intensity until it drowned out all other sound. Zorkak's eyes widened, realization and fear dawning in their reptilian depths. He lunged forward, claws outstretched. But it was too late. The implant detonated, a blinding flash of light consuming Craig's body. The explosion ripped through the throne room, a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel that shredded Arcturian flesh and metal alike. Zorkak vanished in the heart of the blast, his final scream lost in the roar of the flames. The throne room buckled, the hull breaching as the dreadnought shook itself apart. The explosion blasted outward, catching the nearest Arcturian ships in its fiery embrace. Shields failed, hulls ruptured, crews consumed by the ravenous flames. The fleet scattered, ships smashing into each other in their desperate attempts to escape. In the heart of the maelstrom, the Emperor's dreadnought broke apart, massive chunks of wreckage spinning off into the void. The once mighty vessel was reduced to a shattered husk, a tomb for the Arcturian leadership. On the bridge of the human outpost, Lila watched the explosion blossom on the viewscreen, the light reflecting off the tears on her cheeks. She knew, with a certainty that cut to her very soul, that her father was gone. But even as grief threatened to overwhelm her, she felt a flicker of pride. Her father had dealt a blow to the Arcturians that they might never recover from. He'd given humanity a chance. And she would take that chance. She would pick up his mantle, carry on his fight for him, for Earth, for all of humanity. The Arcturian Empire would learn to fear the name Howard once again. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.